bit of a tricky time deciding what exactly I wanted to turn Percy Jackson characters into now that the show is out. Years ago, my audience got me into the book series, but I only made one video around it back then. So I knew with season 1 of the show wrapping up and more of my audience likely being familiar with the story, I had to jump back into another Percy Jackson video. But it was only when Mortal Kombat crossed my mind that I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So today I've written a new Mortal Kombat timeline in which the characters from Percy Jackson are demigods to the gods from Mortal Kombat instead of being demigods influenced by Greek mythology. I'm also taking visual cues from both the TV show and the book series, and spoiler warning for book 1 and season 1 of the show. But with that out of the way, let's get into it, shall we? Let's go.
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
The timeline of existence has been rewritten in many variations by many different deities, meaning that the lives of all beings, including the gods, have been rewritten along with it. Often a new timeline is made with the intent to build greater peace among the realms, but no matter how many times corrections have been made, inevitably the realms always eventually return to their ways of battle. They always eventually return to Mortal Kombat. At one point, the very frustrated and exhausted Raiden, god of thunder and lightning and frequent protector of Earthrealm, had taken command of the timeline and rewritten it into one that went far longer than most without a great period of conflict. A frequent disruptor of the peace, the Titaness of Time, Kornika, had been locked away in the bowels of the Netherrealm, and that seemed to be a key element in keeping a consistent peace. The gods and godlike beings of the realms had found a tenuous truce, held by mutual satisfaction with their amounts of control they each had in the universe. As such, with none of their attention focused on combat and overthrowing one another, many began focusing on getting busy with other matters, so to speak. The results of their exploits would often result in demigod children being born, occasionally birthed to mortals in their own realm, and sometimes in others. Problems quickly arose as the gods would often not take responsibility for their incredibly powerful children, and as the demigods grew up, they'd be hungry to use their abilities to their fullest. Raiden had even attempted to ban some gods he considered more dangerous from having any children at all, but that hadn't ended up stopping anyone. He realized he needed to find some way to deter these demigods from ever attempting to instigate the infamous Mortal Kombat tournament, in which different realms can challenge other realms to face off for the right of the victor to overthrow the loser's lands and people. And so, he created a group and secret temple called the White Lotus on Earthrealm, which the beings trained there would often refer to as Camp Lotus. Whenever a demigod grew into their abilities, they would be found and brought here to train, body and mind, to help them learn to use their abilities responsibly and give them outlets to utilize them that could hopefully keep them from seeking out a violent life path that could compromise the peace Raiden had worked so hard to achieve. But as time went on, Raiden found he was having a harder and harder time maintaining the peace and keeping the demigods under control. It grew to a point where his mounting frustration needed an outlet. And soon, a son of the god of water called Rain would seemingly give him that outlet. In another timeline, Rain had been a demigod prince from the realm of Edenia, who strove to be acknowledged as a full god to the point where he joined allegiances with the war-hungry god of Outworld Shao Kahn. In an attempt to keep him satisfied, Raiden allowed Rain to become a full god in this new timeline. But even that had not been enough. Rain had wanted more power still, and had recently challenged Raiden for the role of leader of the gods. Raiden had just barely managed to talk Rain down, but it made him even more wary of Rain's future endeavors. So, when a source of great power for Raiden, his lightning staff, was stolen, well, he knew Rain couldn't have done it himself as he kept close tabs on the power-hungry god. He quickly came to suspect the boy's son had done it for him, a demigod named Percy Jackson. At the time the lightning staff had been stolen, Percy had been training at Camp Lotus for 5 years, under the watch of the Centaurian who'd brought him to the camp in the first place when he was 13, Motaro. Raiden had kept an eye on the boy, as he was one of the most powerful demigods alive, and more dangerous still, he was impulsive, and dangerously loyal to his friends and allies, to a fault. So far as Raiden knew, Rain had not been a part of the boy's life to that point, but Percy had always still wanted to impress his father and get his attention. Now, with Raiden in his easily irritated and bordering on paranoid state, he felt he was certain the boy had stolen the staff out of loyalty to his father, in an attempt to weaken Raiden and give Rain a better shot at overthrowing the lightning god. Raiden confronted the boy in the center of Camp Lotus and demanded in a rage that the boy return the staff to him. Percy claimed to have no idea what he was talking about, but Raiden wasn't willing to hear it. He nearly killed the boy right then and there, but he held himself back, instead telling Percy that he had 1 week to either return the staff or prove that he hadn't stolen it, or else Raiden would make an example of Percy and his mortal mother. Hearing his mother be threatened immediately kicked Percy into action. He intended to set off to find the staff with his 3 closest allies at Camp Lotus: Annabeth Chase, a daughter of Cetrion who was very blunt and prideful, but had quickly grown on Percy after getting to know her; Grover Underwood, a surprisingly docile Tarkatan Percy had known before ever coming to the camp; and Luke Castellan, a son of Fujin who Percy assumed would be very eager to go on this mission, as it may result in embarrassing Raiden and proving that he was wrong to accuse Percy. Luke didn't openly speak about it much, but Percy and others close to him knew that he really was not a fan of the gods, and should have loved the idea of Raiden having to apologize to Percy for the accusation. Surprisingly, Luke turned down the quest, saying that with Raiden in a state like this, other gods may take the opportunity to go for a power grab, and that would likely involve destroying Camp Lotus to take out any demigods that may try to rise up and stop them. He wanted to stay behind and be ready to protect the camp. It seemed a bit odd to Percy and Annabeth, but they accepted and set off on their mission with Grover. They had 2 strong suspects as to who may have taken the staff. One had been a daughter of the war-hungry Shao Kahn named Clarice. Percy had always distrusted her, as she'd been quite cruel to him when he first arrived at camp, but upon interrogating her, they deemed it quite unlikely that she'd been the culprit. They were given confirmation that Shao Kahn himself had not left his realm at any point in the last week, as he was actively preparing for an outworld fighting tournament, so his alibi was fairly sound. The other children of Kahn were questioned as well, but it seemed clear that none of them were the culprits either. That left them with arguably the more obvious choice: Shinnok, ruler of the Netherrealm. Nobody had heard much of him in centuries, but stories of his treachery were plenty, and it was believed that he was deeply vengeful towards Raiden for banishing him to rule over a dark and isolated realm of the dead. If anyone would want to start a new Mortal Kombat tournament to gain control over a new realm, it had to be him. Or so they thought. They set off to find the entrance to the Netherrealm, but those were few and far between in this new timeline. They had to seek out a being who was not simply one man, but a collection of many souls in one body, called Ermac. Ermac could transport them to Shinnok's realm, but they had to find him first. On their quest, they faced many challengers. Word had gotten around to many dangerous groups and beings that Percy was suspected to have Raiden's staff, and many wanted its power for themselves. A group called the Black Dragon Clan was on their tail the entire quest, with their leader, Kano, being quite a fierce combatant. Though against Percy's water manipulation skills and Annabeth's incredible fighting prowess, Kano never got the better of them. Even the cryomancers of the shadow group called the Lin Kuei came to see for themselves if Percy had the staff, though they were less aggressive in their investigation. Their leader, Bihan, even provided the group with some useful information. The Lin Kuei had secretly investigated the area around Camp Lotus and Raiden's personal temple, and found a discarded or lost artifact nearby called the Eye of Invisibility, an item that could temporarily mask the wielder from sight. He suspected that whoever had taken the staff had used the eye to remain undetected during the theft. Bihan even granted the artifact to Annabeth, stating that he'd observed the group's quarrels with the Black Dragons and been most impressed with her skills. He stated that it was a gift, but also made it clear that they were very interested in her considering joining their ranks. With that, they parted ways with the Lin Kuei and continued on. Eventually, Percy, Grover, and Annabeth were able to find Ermac and convince him to take them to the Netherrealm. Though there they would not find the vengeful god they thought they were after. When the group found the ruler of Netherrealm, Shinnok, they were ready for a potentially fatal confrontation with the furious god of legend. but they were surprised to find he was actually quite a chill guy. In this timeline, Raiden had banished Shinnok to this realm, but he'd also made efforts to improve the quality of life in the Netherrealm, so Shinnok had been quite peaceful there for a long while, and had essentially just tried to stay out of the endeavors of other gods. Of course, Raiden was still highly suspicious of Shinnok because of all the problems he'd caused in other timelines, so Raiden had banned Shinnok from ever having any children. But even that had been something Shinnok had been able to sneak his way around. Still though, Percy and his group were left confused as to who could be the culprit of the staff's theft. They mentioned to Shinnok that they'd questioned the children of Shao Kahn, and that he himself had an alibi. But then Shinnok asked them why they thought only a child of Kahn would do his bidding. It was a good point, and so the group asked Shinnok if he'd be willing to send them to Outworld, the realm of Shao Kahn. Shinnok told them that Kahn would never willingly tell them anything even if he had been involved in the staff's theft, but Annabeth had an idea. If there was one thing Kahn respected more than anything, it was a fierce combatant. The group was sent to Kahn's palace, where the Outworld tournament was soon to commence. They came before Shao Kahn and claimed their suspicions of his involvement in the theft of the staff. They demanded that both Percy and Annabeth be allowed to enter his Outworld tournament, and if they won, he agreed to tell them everything he knew about the whereabouts of Raiden's staff. Kahn was not one to turn down such a challenge and eagerly accepted, secretly hoping they'd get far enough in the tournament just to face off against his would-be right hand. The tournament began and both Annabeth and Percy got through every foe they faced, taking out Shao Kahn warriors, Kaitins, Aterans, and more. Either demigod was looking poised to win the tournament. When Annabeth faced off against a challenger she had no interest in fighting. The next combatant to step into the arena against her was Luke Castellan. As their battle began, Annabeth stayed on the defensive, not wanting to hurt someone who was one of her oldest friends. Luke revealed to her that he had to win this tournament to prove he was worthy of taking Kahn's side in the events to come, but didn't yet say what those were. Annabeth likely could have beaten someone of Luke's skill level if there wasn't so much personal history clouding her judgment, but in the end, the fight went to him, though he still had to face off against Percy to be the true champion. Jackson hadn't known Luke as long as Annabeth, and while they were friends, Percy didn't feel as compelled to hold back. With his water manipulation abilities in full force, he managed to defeat Luke and win the tournament. And while Shao Kahn was not pleased with these results, he was a god who honored rewards won in combat. From behind his throne, he pulled out Raiden's lightning staff. He revealed, surprising no one, that Shao Kahn was eager to commence a new Mortal Kombat tournament and attempt to take command over all 6 realms. But that he knew Raiden had become too powerful, and Kahn knew if he tried to instigate this, the lightning god would likely just execute him for threatening the peace. Kahn needed a way to weaken Raiden first, and thought that taking his lightning staff from him could do the trick. Kahn knew he couldn't steal the staff himself, but luckily Luke had been willing to help. He'd used the Eye of Invisibility to steal the staff and given it to Shao Kahn. And with Raiden weakened, Kahn now intended to instigate the first Mortal Kombat tournament. But he'd also wanted to wait until his Outworld tournament was complete so that he could ensure that Luke truly was the right person to fight as his main combatant in the tournament to come. But seeing as how Luke had lost in the final battle, Shao Kahn now offered that role to Percy. As Kahn suspected, Jackson refused his offer, so begrudgingly he then stated that Luke would be allowed to take the spot as the runner-up of the tournament, but also that part of his deal with Luke would not be honored since he had not actually won. You see, Luke's demand if he won, along with being Shao Kahn's right hand, was that the first realm they challenge be the Netherrealm. That didn't make sense to Percy and his friends at first, as the Netherrealm still seemed like the least desirable out of all of them. But it was because of who was imprisoned there. Kornika. Luke had always underplayed his hatred of the gods. In truth, he wanted to defeat them all and have a realm free of gods where the beings who remained could live as they pleased. The Titaness Kornika sensed his blend of demigod power and hatred of the gods, and her consciousness had contacted Luke. She was influencing his mind with promises of how much better the world would be for him and his demigod brethren if she was freed and allowed to retake control of the universe from Raiden. Luke tried to convince Percy, Annabeth, and Grover that this was the best path they could hope for, but none of them were buying it. Percy hoped that this was all a moot point anyway, that he, Annabeth, and Grover could now fight Shao Kahn here and now and steal the staff back, giving Raiden back his full power. But they didn't end up getting the chance. Shao Kahn raised the staff and shattered it over his knee, causing a massive explosion of lightning. Its impact could be sensed all across the realms as a beacon to all the gods that Raiden was weakened, and the time to rise up against him was now. Shao Kahn officially challenged Earthrealm to Mortal Kombat, and Raiden knew there was no stopping it now. But he hoped that at least if Earthrealm could defeat Outworld, maybe they could keep any more tournaments from being instigated in the future. Percy and his group returned to Camp Lotus, where Raiden gave them a sincere apology for his accusations. He'd watched over them on their quest and seen how they'd conducted themselves valiantly. More importantly, learning that Percy truly had not stolen the staff. He requested that Annabeth and Percy both be members of Earthrealm's combatants in the coming tournament, and while Percy still wasn't the biggest fan of Raiden because of the accusations, he accepted, and of course they both inquired as to who else would be fighting for the realm. Raiden revealed a few other names from camp, but the most surprising was a young woman that many in camp thought to be long dead. Raiden's last living daughter, Thalia. Annabeth and Grover were shaken to see her, as the three of them, along with Luke, had been close friends before ever coming to Camp Lotus, but on their quest to find the camp, they'd been attacked by a Shao Kahn warrior who sought a demigod prisoner to try and get leverage over the gods. Thalia had fallen back to try and hold the Shao Kahn off herself, and had summoned her father's lightning powers to slay the Shao Kahn in an explosive bolt. But she disappeared in the strike, and Annabeth had believed that the impact had eviscerated Thalia as well. It turned out that Raiden had wanted different training for his daughter, and worried that other beings, beasts, and even gods may also try to capture her as leverage against him. So he allowed others to believe her dead, and took her to a secretive group called the Shirai Ryu. There, he would come to train her himself in her demigod abilities that she'd inherited from him, and she'd be trained in hand-to-hand combat and weaponry by Master Warrior Hanzo Hasashi, often called Scorpion. And so, after this reunion with her old friends, Raiden would set Thalia as the lead combatant for Earthrealm, and she'd take Percy and the others chosen to train further with the Shirai Ryu. Percy and her would become friends, but also butt heads on occasion, as Percy wasn't eager to follow her orders. Still, their final days of training were productive, and soon the tournament would commence, in which these demigods would try to recover the peace that Raiden had worked so hard for.
If you enjoyed this, you might want to check out some of my other Mortal Kombat episodes, but most specifically my Avatar The Last Airbender Mortal Kombat video. There's a new live-action Avatar coming out, so it's a good time to go back to that one. And I'd love suggestions for other things you might want to see done with Percy Jackson characters or Mortal Kombat characters, or if you'd want a sequel to this video. Subscribing if you're new here always helps influence a sequel to happen, but I'm open to lots of different ideas. And besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote I read on an Instagram page called Law of Attraction Live, which said the best part of being authentic is that there is no image to maintain. By being your authentic self, you'll delight some and disturb others, but none of it will concern the truth of your being. I think with a bunch of my quotes lately, I've been on an authenticity kind of kick, but I do think it's an important thing. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday, wrapping up the Suicide Squad Grand Prix. See you there. Goodbye.